God designed us to be learners. However, much of our learning and discipleship today regarding the church, current affairs, and theology has been reduced to pithy sayings and viral tweets. Just Say It seeks to help Christians go deeper on church, theology, scripture, and current issues in our world. I'm Chase Davis.
And I'm Matt Patrick. And join us and other guests for a monthly conversation on the topics that are impacting Christians in the church here in Colorado. You can expect candid conversations on the topics ranging from church attendance during ski season to Spurgeon's view of the atonement.
Welcome back to another episode of Just Say It, here with Matt Patrick at the Well Church. We're going to have a series of podcasts coming out on different matters pertaining to life in America, particularly in 2024 being an election year, and we want to speak Christianly about matters. And sometimes we can do a good job of explaining various issues related to inflation, immigration, other such things from the Bible, but it's always helpful to have a policy expert come in and try to help Christians think biblically about different issues. So today on the show, we've got Lora Ries. She's the director of Heritage's Border Security and Immigration Center at the Heritage Foundation. Laura, thanks for joining us today.
Well, thanks for having me on.
So, Laura, why don't you tell, just thinking of our church, the way we do this podcast is pretend you were at our church and sharing with our church. Tell our church a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Well, I've been at the Heritage Foundation for going on 4.5 years now. I've been working on the border and immigration issue for going on 28 years now. Kind of lots of different aspects of it, whether it was working in immigration court, deportation proceedings, working on the Hill, handling legislation, a few tours at the Department of Homeland Security, doing immigration policy, and in the private sector as well.
That's a lot. So you've been around the block on this, so this isn't a new topic for you.
Not at all.
That's great. Well, let's just dive right in then. We want to get into some questions that we think for the average person who goes to church, these are probably things that they're wrestling with, and probably more than ever, they're being forced to actually think about how that impacts their faith and what they should tell their children, neighbors with opinions, all those kinds of things. And so we want to be as helpful as we can. But I'm just going to start with kind of the most obvious question, I think, which is, when we read the Bible, we see a very welcoming spirit in Scripture towards the sojourner and people who are considered the least of these. We also see protecting nations, and there's a lot in there. But I think a tension that a lot of Christians feel is, shouldn't we just be welcoming anybody who wants to come in, and shouldn't we just let them if it's better? I've heard people actually say that. And so I know it's a pretty simple question, and that's a very open-ended and big one, but how would you respond to that?
Well, I think we're living it right now. We have very open borders right now, and Customs and Border Protection have reported that foreigners from over 180 countries have been encountered by them just during this current administration. And there's only 193 countries in the globe, 192 if you exclude us. So we're looking at over, I think, 93% of the world's nations have been coming here the past 3.5 years. And the result of that is, a lot of them come for better lives, economic reasons. That's understandable. But unfortunately, among them also come serious criminals and terror threats. And so we as a nation have a right to our citizens to protect our borders and protect American citizens who live here, including lawful immigrants. And so you have to find that balance. But we all need a system that is lawful and orderly and manageable year after year. And unfortunately, that's not what we have right now.
Yeah. Just to piggyback off that real quick, Chase, I think it's important that we differentiate out of the gate that there is a difference between entering the country illegally versus through legal means. And I understand the legal means may be hard, but I haven't heard anybody argue against just saying we shouldn't let anybody in through legal means. Would I be right in saying that, Laura? That's not really the argument at all.
Right. And if you talk to Americans, I mean, their visceral reaction, understanding, desire is that line between they want people to come here lawfully, not unlawfully. And, we can debate about what should the lawful system look like. Should it be more family-based? Should it be more employment-based? How many? Within employment-based, do we need more high-tech skills? Do we need more nurses? We can debate about all of that. But unfortunately, right now, we are on defense, and we're having to address the illegal immigration that's occurring in the numbers of millions. And so we need to get a handle on that and get that under control. And then can we turn to better address the legal system, because it is overly, needlessly complicated, expensive, slow, frustrating, for sure.
Yeah, I think one of the things that comes up in this with Christians is there's a failure of education for many Christians, and I would say many pastors, to think politically. So what I mean by that is we as a church have certain duties. We have the keys of the kingdom with the sacraments, and the nation has political duties under the lordship of Christ to protect its citizens, to promote good. We see these things in 1 Peter and in Romans 13. And so Christians have a really hard time, and actually you'll see it with more leftist-minded people, when they take the kind of Christian approach, which is hospitality and kind of welcoming the stranger, they put that onto the nation as if the nation is, the new Israel or something like that. And I found that weird. But I did want to ask, thinking politically and thinking of the church, how do you think the church can care for the least of these? I mean, you see, we're near Denver. I mean, we see hotels being taken over. The city's overrun. The budget is out of control on trying to take care of people. And you'll see some churches kind of organize drives, for food or shelter or anything like that. And it's very confusing because at the same time, many Christians, I think rightfully, have a sense that this doesn't seem right. Like, it seems like we're being overrun. I know some more political commentators have called it an invasion of sorts. And so how do you think Christians should think in those categories as far as what the church should do and what we should do as citizens of this nation?
Well, people naturally think of traditional asylum and helping those who are fleeing persecution from their government back home. But unfortunately, and I personally view asylum, refugee protection, it's really two sides of the same coin, as the second most important, sacred, if you will, immigration benefit that we offer as a country after U.S. citizenship. But unfortunately, I think the left has hijacked our compassion and really grossly abused what the asylum refugee protection system is supposed to be. The most glaring example of that is during this administration, the media, the Secretary of Homeland Security, it doesn't matter. They just echo each other, referring to anyone who's coming here illegally all as asylum seekers. And all that does is encourage more asylum fraud. And so asylum is supposed to be about you're fleeing for your life, because you either faced past persecution or you have a well-founded fear of future persecution on account of your race, your religion, your nationality, your political opinion, or unfortunately, there's a catch-all fifth called membership in a particular social group. It's never been defined. And unfortunately, the left tries to shoehorn in a lot of circumstances into that category, like victims of domestic abuse. I don't see how who would want to be a member of that group, and it's certainly not social. Climate change, I mean, you name it. But anyway, so we're getting far afield from what I think a lot of Americans, a lot of Christians think about helping their fellow man in terms of asylum protection and refugee protection. And because it is very subjective to apply for that immigration benefit, and because millions have applied for it and are still awaiting their case to be heard, it buys people years here to stay and to work. After 6 months or even faster of applying for asylum, you can get your work authorization. And that's why a lot of people apply for asylum, frankly. And so that's the situation we find ourselves in. And that's not what was intended when countries signed on to the convention, following World War II. It's not what Congress intended when they agreed to this. And so really we need to get a handle on it and get back to what was really intended, to uphold that very important benefit and to help people who are truly fleeing for their lives and not letting so many defraud the system.
That's really good. And I kind of want to throw a different question than we were planning, because you said something there that's actually been something I've been personally writing about and thinking about a lot the last few years, is you said that people are having their compassion weaponized against them. Mm-hmm. I think that is a real issue that Christians are unaware oftentimes that they're facing, is that we want to be a compassionate people. We want to be people that try to understand where people are coming from and all these things. But I think what we've seen, particularly from the government that's leading our nation currently, is that they see that as an in to bend our wills and to straw man us and gaslight us and all of those, catchphrases that are used nowadays. And so I would love to hear from you when we're dealing with the issue of immigration, maybe help the listener think through what's the difference between, true compassion in these sorts of things versus having your compassion weaponized against you, and how might they fight against that?
Well, I mean, for starters, you want to help populations that are truly persecution victims. I mean, you can think of different groups around the world, whether it's the Uyghurs in China, Israelis, you can go around the globe. And how can the U.S. help the most people? Well, it's actually helping them in their region. So if they are displaced, if if you're Ukrainian and you go to another Eastern European country to be safe, we can help more people in that region than taking what are relatively smaller numbers of people and bring them to the U.S. to resettle here. In their region, they are closer to others with the same language, the same culture. And if you help them there, then they are more likely to return to their homeland when conditions improve and then can help rebuild, versus bringing them here to the U.S., where now, unfortunately, assimilation, the American melting pot are bad terms, according to the left. And you're not helping as many people. And so it could be whether it's helping organizations that, refugee camps elsewhere in the world in their region for displaced populations. And then in terms of bringing people here that can't be permanently resettled elsewhere, then it is helping them resettle into the U.S., teaching about citizenship, trying to encourage assimilation, helping them learn English, helping them be as successful as possible over the long term, but being loyal to their new fellow Americans, being loyal to our education system, et cetera, et cetera. And, since October 7th, for example, we're not necessarily seeing examples of that in our own country. And so those are just some aspects of what's needed and how we can best help the most number of people.
Okay, maybe talk about this might be interesting is, because, well, first of all, let me ask this. What are the stats right now? Do you have any stats readily available as far as like what we're looking at right now in terms of how many, whether legal or illegal immigrants, if you want to break it down there, how many are currently in the United States? Has this problem gotten worse over the last few years? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So on the illegal side of the fence, for many, 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 many years, too many, the number that was cited of illegal aliens in the country pre-Biden was 11 million. And it was always, you had to question it because it was the same number always cited. There was a study by MIT and Yale, I believe, put out in 2019 that said now we think the number is more like 20 to 22 million. So again, that's pre-Biden. Now, during this Biden administration, U.S. Customs and Border Protection have reported about 10 million illegal alien encounters, of which Secretary Mayorkas of Homeland Security has admitted they're releasing the vast majority. At one point, he said at least 85% into the country. So we'll call that roughly 8 million. On top of that, CBP unofficially will tell reporters there's at least 2 million known gotaways. These are people who did not just cross the border and sit down and wait for Border Patrol and wait for their free plane ticket or bus ticket anywhere to the U.S. and that they wanted to go. The known gotaways are people who purposely evaded the Border Patrol because they didn't want it to be photographed or have their fingerprints taken, because they're either smuggling people, smuggling drugs, have past criminal convictions, or could be on the terror watch list. And so if you take roughly 8 million plus 2 million known gotaways, we don't even know the unknown gotaways. And I should explain, known gotaways are people who are either seen on cameras or sensors or footprints were tracked. That's how CBP estimates known gotaways. There's also unknown gotaways, and we don't know that number. So anyway, we're talking millions of people just in the past 3.5 years.
Okay. And then, sorry, I have a lot of questions on these kind of things. So like I've heard, and, some people, there's theories out there about the Great Replacement, and some people have just openly come out and said that it's good that it's happening, but it's interesting and it's strange how I've heard they're busing people. I mean, Denver's a great example, right? They're taking people who I guess you would call it capture at the border or whatever, and they're busing them to different locales all over. Like I've heard of Somali refugees or immigrants or illegal immigrants like ending up in Minnesota, which is just such a foreign context to them and foreign to those people. And Christians are made to feel like, well, if you don't like that, something's wrong with you. Is there kind of a rationale as to why they're busing people into so many different locations across the country?
Well, there's a few different aspects to it. So if people are crossing illegally, aliens choose where they're going to go. And migrants historically have gone to whether they have family or friends or acquaintance or a job lined up. And over the years, another way that people do come into the U.S. are foreigners who've been granted refugee protection by the U.S., and then they are flown to the U.S. and resettled in different communities. And a number of Somalis have been resettled in Minnesota, more coming to be resettled in Wisconsin. And so given that population, if someone is then illegally crossing the border and they're from Somalia, they might say, well, I have a family member in Minnesota, so that's where I'm going to go.
Gotcha. Okay. And then what, like the path to citizenship, and just for the listener, if you're going to the Well Church, here's how I kind of think about it, is like if somebody wanted to become a member of our church, and we hold the keys to the kingdom, such as communion, the Lord's table, and baptism. And we had people try to we're doing baptisms this Sunday. We have 4 people getting baptized, which is awesome. But if somebody were to try to jump in the baptistry, or somebody were to try to take communion and they shouldn't be taking communion, it's our job as pastors to be guarding those and to make sure that doesn't happen. Same thing with membership. If you want to be admitted, there's certain processes. You have to believe and adhere to certain things. There's a certain process of assimilation. In the same way, nations have a duty and a responsibility to their citizenry to have processes. And so I wanted to ask a little bit about that assimilation process and why I think the tension is, if there is a good assimilation process, whether they have to learn English or learn basic history of the United States, those are important aspects to, like you talked about, loyalty to their new nation. So what does that process look like to become a citizen?
Well, first you have to have what's known as a green card or lawful permanent residence here in the U.S. And you can gain lawful permanent residence either through employment or through a family member. But once you gain that green card or lawful permanent residence, then you have to wait a number of years before you can apply to naturalize. And you don't have to naturalize. You can spend the rest of your life in that category of lawful permanent residence. And there seems to be a growing number of green card holders that opt for that, which I think is a symptom of, watering down this what it means to be a citizen. But in any case, so if you are married to a U.S. citizen and you have a green card, you can apply to naturalize after 3 years. If you have a green card and you're applying on your own self status, you can apply after 5 years. And if you're in the military and have a green card, you can apply faster, either a year, or if you're in active duty in combat, you can apply immediately. And so the citizenship application process, the form itself is kind of lengthy. You do have to take an English test, but I will say it's been very watered down. When people out of curiosity take a look at this, they're surprised at how little is required. You have to take a civics test. They give you they publish all the potential questions. And so you can study those, and then you're asked, I think, 10 at most. And you have to, once you get a certain number right, then you're done. So it too, sadly, has been very watered down. And I don't think enough people know that. And so just the application process has kind of lessened the importance of some of these aspects of becoming a citizen. But on top of that, assimilation is a dirty word for the left. They want cultures and religions to, keep and maintain and continue to exercise those languages and cultures and religions, and not be that melting pot that we've known historically. But unfortunately, that leads to fragmentation within a nation. I mean, we've seen this in other countries, whether it's Europe or elsewhere. And I say that we saw examples of it here immediately after October 7th, whether it's, the Palestinian flags after the awful slaughters and rapes and just brutality in Israel. We weren't seeing people coming together in common unity behind one of our best allies.
Well, when I think about this, it's complex because we're dealing with human beings, right? And there's thousands of different stories of why somebody would enter our country illegally, and I always think of it, through this lens of, hey, like if I was a father and I had my family and, I had a better opportunity in the United States, I lived in Mexico, and I knew the chance of me getting a green card was low, well, then why not go for it, right? But I think as I think about that now and see what's going on, I mean, that's a problem in and of itself. Like there needs to be a process there. But that's not really the majority of what we're worried about here, right? It's a lot of, like we see it with human trafficking going on. We see fentanyl. We see drugs coming across the border. That it's easy as Christians just to think of, oh, these people just want a better life, but it's much deeper than just that, right? Because that's normally kind of the trope we're fed, which is it's just people wanting a better life. So why should we stand in their way? But the issue is that we're seeing our nation flooded with drugs. We're seeing human trafficking. We're seeing potential terrorists entering the country. And I'm not as educated on that. So maybe talk about why this matters. And it's not just a people wanting a better life kind of issue.
Yeah, you're right. That is the common line that is used. And as long as it's easier and faster to come illegally to the U.S. than legally, then rational people will choose that path. And that's what we're seeing happen right now with the millions who are coming because they can, and there aren't any consequences right now. But with that, then bad actors can and do exploit that situation. So you're right. Terrorists can get in, convicted rapists and felons, et cetera, can get in and do enter. And the drug trafficking, fentanyl is coming, the precursor ingredients of fentanyl is coming from China to Mexico. Then the fentanyl is produced in Mexico and coming across the southern border. And we're talking the equivalent of 3 grains of salt of fentanyl can poison a person. And I say poison intentionally because many other drugs are laced with fentanyl. And so there are a lot of unknowing Americans, particularly young people, who don't realize that they are taking fentanyl. They didn't ask for it. They think they are taking another drug or another medication, and then are poisoned by fentanyl. They weren't a drug addict, so it's not really an overdose. But it is killing historic numbers of young Americans in particular. And so that is what an open border and mass illegal immigration results in. But also, Americans are feeling this every day all over the country, whether it is, you talked about, shelters or hotels in Denver being converted to shelters for illegal aliens who've come here, whether it is schools who are without notice and immediately have to educate, perhaps thousands more children. I think in New York City this past fall, it was 20,000 more new children from overseas that they suddenly had to, enroll and begin educating in the public school system. So American students and their parents, they see that every day in crowded classrooms, or less attention from their teachers because, these other students either don't speak English or don't speak it well and don't understand the instructions or the content. And so that has an effect on education quality for other students, whether it is hospitals and emergency rooms having to wait much longer to be seen in an emergency room because these new populations perhaps don't have a doctor and don't have insurance. So they just treat emergency rooms as their primary care facility. So there are everyday effects on Americans across the country, which is why border security right now is the number one issue or number 2 issue, poll after poll after poll. So there are very real effects fiscally, personally, and not just for Americans, but for the migrants themselves. This issue is often painted as, yes, they're coming here for better lives, and once they get here, they're so much better off. But the journey, particularly if they're coming through, Panama, the Darien Gap, through Central America, through Mexico and our border now is completely operated by drug cartels. You cannot cross our border without going through a drug cartel. And these are some of the most vicious people on the planet. And so women, girls regularly raped by these cartel members or worse. So it is extremely dangerous, these conditions, for the migrants themselves. And it doesn't necessarily improve once they get into the U.S. Then they have to pay off those smuggling debts, which often means sex trafficking or child labor violations for the minors.
I think one of the things that comes up when I'm talking to Christians about this is the left has kind of used, I always say it used to be judge not was the common phrase that people who are not Christians or the left or whoever it may be, even libertarian minded Americans would say, judge not, just kind of live and let live. And now it's more of an active, love your neighbor. You got to love your neighbor. And so in order to love your neighbor, you got to welcome them. But the way I've kind of thought about it is it's unloving to our neighbors here in the United States to allow all of this. Can you speak to that? How can we think Christianly about loving our neighbors that are here? And how is it unloving to allow this mass immigration, whether it's legal or illegal? How is it unloving to the people who reside in our nation to do that?
Well, part of living in a loving community is safety. It's personal safety and it's well-being, which means, we need to have people respecting laws, and not just in how they crossed our border, whether it was legally or illegally, but then once here and part of the community. And we need to have resources directed for, our members of the community, whether it's our veterans or, someone who is hard on their luck and needs services. And yet, time and time again, we're seeing reports where our resources are being directed away from veterans and away from American citizens and to people who came here unlawfully. And so that's not sustainable as a country and as a community. And so we're kind of devolved into this life where it generates skepticism and not such loving conditions towards fellow man. And so that's why you have to find this balance of, yes, we want to be a nation that continues to have an immigration system, but again, it needs to be lawful and orderly and manageable. And I think manageable is the key word and to answer your question, so that we can continue to live the good life, not just for ourselves, but for our neighbors, to have good, strong communities. And when we have this chaos, it's not good for anybody.
Right. I think there were a couple more questions if you've got time. I know we're going a little bit longer than we anticipated, but one was related to NGOs' involvement in mass migration, and the other, I was going to have Matt ask about just various parties where they, the predominant ones. I think the Libertarians have like 3%, but Republican and Democrat, where they land. So, but the first one is kind of the NGOs. I've heard rumors of this, how there's non-governmental organizations, whether religious or otherwise, that are like helping with this stuff. What's going on there?
Yeah, so this administration and the Obama administration did the same thing. They rely heavily on non-governmental organizations. And it's basically contracting out, granting out, in this case, to third parties to do what the government itself cannot. And so there are billions of dollars going out multiple departments to non-governmental organizations, many of them faith-based organizations, including Catholic Charities, Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, Lutheran Immigrant Refugee Services, Church World Services. I could go on and on. It's quite a web of these faith-based organizations. And the money is going out through the State Department, through Department of Homeland Security, the Justice Department, Health and Human Services, to the point now where these organizations, in some cases, make more money off of federal grants than they do from church donations. And frankly, to be blunt, they've become addicted to it. They then turn and will hire lobbyists to advocate for more immigration and to advocate against immigration restrictions. And then in some cases also will sue these same departments that give them grants for cases where they argue, there's not, the policy is too restrictive or there was reliance on a benefit or something like that. So donor beware, because many people don't know that these organizations are doing this, but it can be organizations set up in northern South America all the way through Central America that will receive foreigners traveling to Central America, help them through the Darien Gap in Panama, help them get to our U.S. border, receive them at the border, and then get them a plane ticket or a bus ticket to anywhere in the U.S.
Wow.
So to be blunt, it is smuggling. In some cases, we're talking trafficking. And just interesting small project that we did here at Heritage, we said, all right, we want to track let's track anonymously phone devices that cross between ports of entry on the southern border. So that means they're crossing illegally because they're not going through a port. We're going to give this company that tracks these devices 30 NGOs, known NGOs on the southern border, and tell us where those phones go over a 30-day period. So really a small snapshot. Those phones, it was about 30,000, went to every single congressional district in the country except for one. So
wow.
These NGOs are helping people go all over the country. And we're paying for it. in terms of the taxpayer money and federal grants going to these organizations.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I didn't know all of that. That's very illuminating and not a great way.
Yeah.
So when we think about, we're in an election year, I think it can feel fair, like on these kinds of topics, it's, whether you're a Republican or a Democrat. Oh, there goes my lights again. Sorry. We'll edit that. But when you're thinking of it, where do the main political parties, so Republican, Democrat, where are they kind of landing on solutions to this? Or is it, smoke just being blown by both parties? And, it seems like there's plenty of blame to be placed all around. But what are we looking at coming up in this election year? What would be helpful for a listener to know?
Well, at the federal level, U.S. Congress, the House did pass an excellent border security bill a year ago now called the Secure the Border Act. H.R. 2 is the bill number. It would actually stop a lot of this flow. It would prevent a lot of the asylum fraud I was talking about before. It would prevent a lot of the abuse, close loopholes, et cetera. It's been sitting over in the Senate and the desk for over a year, gathering dust. And the Senate, led by Chuck Schumer, has refused to take it up. Meanwhile, the Senate negotiated a border security bill, I put in air quotes, but it didn't get past a procedural vote. It failed back in February. Senator Schumer tried to bring it up again for a vote last week, and it failed by an even larger margin last week because it would not secure the border. It would actually take the very tools, open border tools that President Biden and Secretary Mayorkas have been using, expand them and codify them, and tie the hands of a future president that might be more enforcement minded from being able to enforce the law. So it rightfully failed. So now it's just, the Democrats saying, oh, Republicans voted down this bill and don't want border security. They just want a talking point. And so you have both parties, pointing at each other. But frankly, the president knows that he's in trouble on this issue. Like I said, it's a number one, number two issue consistently, poll after poll. And so he is looking to get this millstone off of his neck and on to the Republicans. But we only have one president at a time. And so I think the American public is wise to what's going on here. There's been a lot more activity at the state level because the Biden administration has not been enforcing the law and not been securing the border, even though it's a federal job. And so you've had states like Texas and Florida be pretty active on this. You've had other states just pass legislation that's good on trying to make it more difficult to reside illegally in their state, whether it's Georgia, Iowa passed a law, Oklahoma. And so you have then the Biden administration either suing, in the case of Texas, they sued Arizona earlier, or threatening to sue Oklahoma, Iowa after passing these laws. So it's kind of interesting to see the federal government would just be better off doing its own job rather than chasing these states for trying to secure their own states. So it's an interesting federal dynamic. But it's always a controversial issue. And unfortunately, whereas you used to have President Clinton, then Senator Obama, then Senator Biden, Hillary Clinton, they used to be for border security, fund the border wall. Now the left generally has just moved radically left and taken on this open border agenda. It's very much a globalist view. It's also very partisan and about political power. They are looking for votes. They are trying to get more legislation where even illegal aliens can vote in elections. And some will even admit it's about they need the head count for census and redistricting so that a state like California with a large non-citizen population gets more congressional districts. Because right now there is not a citizenship question on the U.S. Census. So there's a few different reasons for it, whether it's just pure politics and power or more globalist borders shouldn't exist ideology.
For sure. Well, this was really illuminating. Thanks for spending time with our church podcast. I know it's a lowly church podcast, but we appreciate you coming on and sharing your expertise on this matter, Lora. Thanks so much for your time.
Well, happy to do it. Thanks for having me on.
And if you enjoyed this or if you hated it, we would be glad to talk with you. We want to talk about these issues. We can obviously apply a biblical perspective, a pastoral perspective. If you go to the Well Church, we're always happy to talk about these matters. We just want to provide this resource to better educate you on what's going on in our nation as we look forward to the election coming up here this year. And if you enjoyed this, share it with a friend, give it a great rating. Maybe talk about it with a neighbor, a real neighbor, not one that lives all the way across the world, a neighbor in your life, that this would be an important topic that a lot of people do care about. And so I think Christians have a unique opportunity to weigh in on this matter with biblical sense, with a Christian worldview. So share it, rate it, and until next time, we will see you.